you're always disappointed. However, I believe that today's youth have more opportunities provided they possess the character that drives them to keep trying. Before turning 11, Eleanor Roosevelt buried her father, mother, and brother. However, the trauma of childhood was only the start. She had suffered betrayals that would shatter most people by the time she passed away in 1962 at the age of 78. Her daughter's startling dishonesty, her husband's infidelity, and a covert relationship that persisted for decades. Her worst experiences were exposed when her private notebooks were eventually made public. The woman who advocated for human rights was engaged in an internal conflict that no one was aware of. On October 11, 1884, she was born in New York City. Anna Eleanor Roosevelt was her name. Theodore Roosevelt's younger brother, Elliot Roosevelt, was her father. Anna Hall Roosevelt, her mother, was a stunning woman who took pride in her appearance. However, she didn't see any of it when she glanced at Eleanor. She called her grandmother, made fun of her own daughter, and kept telling her how unattractive she was. Even as a young child, Eleanor learned to keep her emotions to herself. Despite his charm, her father was damaged on the inside. Alcohol took hold of him. He would vanish for days, return shaking, and occasionally become uncontrollable. Eleanor would spend hours sitting next to her mother, reading aloud to relieve the agony of her terrible migraines. Even though she was only 4 years old, she was already behaving like an adult. Her mother contracted diphtheria in December 1892 and passed away at the age of 29. Eleanor was 8 years old. She recalled the farewell. After whispering it softly, her mother left. Eleanor slept in the dark, afraid and silent, both that night and many others. Even with the fire going, the home seemed cold. In May 1893, a few months later, her younger brother, Elliot Jr., perished from scarlet fever. He was just 4 years old. Eleanor that she had let him down. For the remainder of her life, she lived with that shame in silence. Her father then leaped from a window in August of 1894. He was not immediately killed. The following day, he suffered a seizure and died at the age of 34. People were informed that it was heart illness. Eleanor, however, was aware of the reality. She had buried her father, mother, and brother before turning 11. Her youth had ended before it had truly started. She was moved to live in Tivoli, New York, with her grandmother, Mary Livingston Ledlow Hall, along with her surviving brother, Hall. Despite its size, the house seemed frigid. It was run by her grandmother, who had strict regulations and high standards. To straighten her back, Eleanor had to wear unpleasant braces. She wore clothing that made her feel even more uncomfortable. She was not permitted to laugh aloud. In that house, joy had a curfew. Eleanor frequently compared herself to an elderly woman stuck in a girl's body and referred to herself as a solemn child. However, there was a silent sense of security despite the strictness. She was fed, dressed, and kept upright by her grandma. For a while, that was plenty. Allenswood followed. Eleanor was transported to a school for girls in England in 1899. Marie Sylvester, the head mistress, was more than just a school administrator. She kindled mental fires. She pushed Eleanor to act, think, and feel. Together, they strolled through galleries, impoverished areas, and factories. Eleanor's perspective broke. She observed the lives of the impoverished. She was fluent in French. She paid attention. She evolved. Her first true mentor and pillar of support was Marie. Perhaps Eleanor was understood even by the first person she ever formed a connection with. Eleanor remained close to Marie's letters for the remainder of her life after her death in 1905. Eleanor returned to a world of ballrooms and social conventions in New York in 1902, but she didn't belong there. She was sneaking off to volunteer on Rivington Street, down in the Lower East Side's immigrant slums, while others danced and sipped champagne. She instructed kids without shoes in dancing. She passed smashed windows and entered crowded rooms that smelled of smoke and illness. There, more than at any tea gathering, she felt alive. She wrote on her encounters with families. She did what she wanted to do: help them, listen, and show up. When her uncle was elected president in 1901, she had to curtsy and smile in front of strangers who were evaluating her posture, speech, and even how she dressed. She and her cousin Alice Roosevelt made their official White House debut in 1902. She detested it. The pressure to marry well, the gossip, the dresses. The whole event felt like a trap, she wrote in her letters. A life of dresses and gossip was not for her. She was looking for purpose. Franklin then arrived. She married Franklin D. Roosevelt on March 17, 1905. She was 20 years old. Her grandmother's home served as the venue for the wedding, rather than a large church. She was escorted down the aisle by her uncle, President Theodore Roosevelt. Love wasn't the only factor in the marriage. There was a cost associated with the merging of two prosperous American families. Sarah Delano Roosevelt, Franklin's mother, got involved in everything. She had a townhouse constructed, with a sliding door connecting it to Eleanor's residence. She frequently stepped over that boundary by observing, criticizing, and correcting. She claimed to be a better mother than Eleanor to the kids. It made a deep cut. Eleanor discovered the letters after Franklin had an affair with Lucy Mercer in 1916. A suitcase had been used to conceal them. Lucy was her own employee. The treachery burned. Franklin declined the divorce proposal from Eleanor. If he consented, his mother and his advisors threatened to destroy him. Thus, the marriage changed from being a romantic partnership to a political one, and the affair officially ended. Eleanor lost her first son, Franklin Jr., to influenza in 1909. He was only 8 months of age. The weight of it caused her to collapse. She held herself responsible. She spent days in her room. Her past continued to reverberate. Her brother, father, mother, and now her child are all gone. Over the years, she struggled with despair, which she frequently concealed with a faint smile. The last wound occurred in 1945. At Warm Springs, Franklin passed away. Lucy Mercer was present, but Eleanor was not. Knowing the reality and concealing it from her mother, her daughter Anna had set it up. Eleanor was devastated once more. The hurt of betrayal returned. Franklin had choose Lucy even in his last hours, and Anna had supported him. It led to a mother-daughter lull that never entirely ended. Eleanor Roosevelt didn't wait for someone to give her a part when she stepped out of the safety of her privileged world in 1917 and into the terrible turmoil of World War I. She started driving ambulances close to the French front lines while volunteering with the Red Cross. The maximum duration of each shift was 12 hours. As she loaded the wounded, many of whom were still screaming, and some of whom were silent in shock, bombs continued to reverberate around the field. The metal and blood odor filled the air. She saw men with severed limbs burnt beyond recognition. Some of them are not older than her own kids. One boy was only 17. He passed away in his sister's arms while holding a picture of her. The tremor of far-off explosions permeated the nights. Sewing wounds with trembling fingers took days. She would never forget the sobs or the quiet. Something was deeply etched in her by the battle, and she detested war with a silent, raging conviction for the rest of her life. The war concluded in 1920. However, a fresh battle had started. Eleanor became a member of the League of Women Voters after women gained the right to vote. She did more than just go to meetings. She immediately entered New York's densely populated immigrant areas. She observed women who were scared to sign up at all. Some were warned that if they tried, they would be deported. Others received beatings from local police or warnings from landlords. For many, the $2 cost of poll taxes was equivalent to a day's wages. A woman was once forcibly removed from a polling place. Eleanor took more than simply notes. She brought attorneys to educate women about their rights. She established night classes. She created a secure space for women to congregate in the basement. Voices that had never spoken in public before emerged from these chambers. And Eleanor continued to appear until thousands of hitherto silent people were waiting in line to cast their ballots. She entered a new battlefield between 1924 and 1933. She started working as a teacher at Todd Hunter School for Girls. She instructed students in literature, history, and current affairs. However, the pages were insufficient. She displayed pictures of kids in factories to her students. A 12-year-old girl was found lying on the floor of a factory, with blood on her lips from a violent cough. Eleanor made the students debate both sides of the child labor issue by asking, "Would you want to be treated like that?" When the females realized this was more than simply policy, they writhed. It was about kids their age working for pennies in dirt. Labor activists were invited into the classroom by her. A few had been imprisoned. A few had been placed on a blacklist. Eleanor wished for her pupils to graduate with more than just a degree. She wished for them to depart with moral integrity. She had previously assumed leadership at the Lower East Side University Settlement Home while she was a member of the Junior League. Here, she instructed children of Italian immigrants in dance and English. Grammar wasn't the end of her instruction. She used her own stipend to pay for the food and medication she smuggled in. Sarah Delano Roosevelt, her mother-in-law, referred to it as slumming. She was disregarded by Eleanor. She discovered a family of 5 wearing rags and without heat one icy night. She purchased coats for them. She had a physician with her. She didn't request authorization. She helped women who had been beaten by their husbands or shunned by society by walking the alleys at night. Whether it was wrong or not didn't matter to her. "I was unwilling to be courteous," she said. "I wanted to help." She then met Lena Hickok in 1926. Eleanor referred to her as Hick, a journalist. Later, they would write more than 3,000 letters. One was written in 1933 and said nothing more than, "I want to put my arms around you." They were unadulterated, 4 pages at times. Eleanor wrote of her loneliness. When Eleanor was ill or on the road, Hick replied with consolation, occasionally with cash. Eleanor wasn't trying to hide. She was making it. She never described them to one another in detail. However, the intimacy, pain, and need were evident to anybody who read the letters. Once concealed, these letters now portray Eleanor as a human being, attempting to gain recognition rather than as a first lady. Eleanor started contributing to the Women's Democratic News in 1925. She literally descended into coal mines. No one wanted to discuss the widespread prevalence of black lung illness. Black muck was coughed up by miners. 90% of West Virginia's underground coal miners exhibited symptoms, but there were no safety regulations. She quoted a man who remarked, "I taste dust every morning." There was nothing poetic in Eleanor's writing. It hurt. It infuriated people. Lawmakers felt uneasy about it. However, it was successful. The Coal Mine Act was passed in 1935, 10 years later. Her exposure of suffering aided in the passage of safety legislation. Eleanor began writing her daily piece, My Day, in 1933. It was unprocessed. She owned it. She sat with folks in breadlines and went to soup kitchens. She paid attention. A maid was providing for 5 people as her boss grumbled about having to close one of her properties, according to a column published in October 1936. Eleanor gave, not just wrote. Her yearly salary of $35,000 was donated directly to charity. Her column had 4 million daily readers by 1936. New job centers, emergency cash, and a link between the people sleeping on the streets outside of a far-off White House were all made possible by that column. Eleanor drove a Model T Ford across New York in 1928 when Franklin was running for governor. While she gave her own remarks, that automobile, which was estimated to be worth $500, bounced down dirt roads, a total of 150 events. She talked about more than simply politics. She was honest. According to her, 1 in 3 women in the city had experienced domestic abuse. She provided numbers. She narrated tales. A woman who went outside without permission was beaten. Another was turned down for a doctor's appointment because her spouse wouldn't pay. Her speeches lacked civility. They were audacious. Some referred to her as dangerous. It didn't bother her. She was encouraging women to cast ballots. Her book, When You Think, Therefore Is Now, was published in 1932. This was no ordinary memoir. It was a shove. She talked about her 1919 League of Nations campaign. They hurled bottles at her. She was once arrested for distributing flyers alone. That year, 50 individuals were hurt in riots. Neighborhoods were cleared of German-American families. She continued to appear. She felt that women were essential to democracy. The novel turned into a subdued call to action. It was read by thousands. A lot of people ran for office. For the first time, more people cast ballots. Eleanor's bravery was infectious. She had switched to radio by 1929. Over half of the U.S. population, or 60 million people, tuned in to her broadcasts during the Dust Bowl. She wrote in 1933 about children coughing up blood, families choking on the air, and dust storms blocking out the sun. I haven't seen the sun in a week, a farmer informed her. She used such rumors as leverage. The Resettlement Administration was established. Federal funds poured in. She was referred to as a socialist. She continued. The static was broken by her voice. Power didn't sound like it. It sounded like a caring person. On March 6, 1933, Eleanor started hosting press conferences exclusively for women. In the first, 35 reporters were crammed into a room with insufficient seating. Over the course of 12 years, she hosted 348 of them. Women were not permitted to attend presidential press conferences at the time. Their jobs were rescued by these conferences. Eleanor's insistence on granting access led to the hiring of 11 women as official White House journalists by 1940. She didn't conduct gentle interviews. She advocated for civil rights and equitable wages. When few people were paying attention, she assisted them in becoming political voices. She participated in the National Youth Administration's founding in 1935. After visiting more than 100 camps, she discovered despair. Teenage suicide rates were rising. She authored columns on the subject. She advocated for mental health initiatives, school aid, and job training. More than 2 million youth were assisted by the NYA. Her efforts elevated young people from a marginalized group to a top priority. She made testimony that rocked Congress during the Fair Labor Standards Act debate. She had gone to a mill in Georgia, where children as young as 12 worked 16 hours for 10 cents. She shouted them out loud in front of parliamentarians, wrote down their names, and detailed their faces. In 1938, the law was passed on October 24. It established a government minimum wage and outlawed child labor. Overnight, it restored dignity to 700,000 workers. She poured herself into the federal art project as well. She battled to get money for murals depicting racial injustice and lynchings. She defied critics who favored the preservation of art's beauty and security. She thought truth might be revealed via art. Through the scheme, 5,000 artists were able to find employment. They adorned America's walls with truth. A mess was discovered by Eleanor in Arthurdale, West Virginia. Sewage ran in the yards and the houses were in disrepair, despite the fact that it was meant to be a model community for minors. She walked through mud, drove there, and wrote irate letters to FDR calling for reform. There were 165 additional houses there by 1934. She ensured that they had hope, heat, and plumbing. She was not interested in photo opportunities. She desired leak-proof roofs. When she visited munitions plants in 1940, she observed women working without any safety equipment. 20% of the women in one Ohio facility miscarried as a result of being exposed to hazardous dust. Because of her concerns, the government was compelled to enhance manufacturing conditions. She was more than just the wife of the president. She served as the Oversight Committee's lone member. She traveled to 40 USO camps in 1942. She shocked the nation by dancing with black soldiers at segregated sites. She was charged by newspapers with upsetting the social order. In response, she declared that segregation was un-American. Her efforts sparked discussions regarding military integration and helped change public perception. She went to one of the internment camps for Japanese Americans, Manzanar, in 1943. She wrote to FDR, pleading with him to fix the communal troughs where families were eating. She referred to it as cruel. She called for citizens to be released more quickly. The administration found it more difficult to maintain the appearance that these locations were humane after her visit. She pushed for the inclusion of female veterans in the GI Bill in 1944. 40% of them had been refused benefits. She cited women who had served in the Women's Army Corps but were informed they didn't count in her testimony before Congress. Her exertion was successful. The legislation was modified. Women were given access to jobs, housing, and education. President Truman, like the men, shocked the political community in December 1945 when he named Eleanor Roosevelt the United States representative to the newly established United Nations. She entered that facility not only as a delegate, but also as a symbol during a period when women were uncommon in positions of international authority. She was appointed chair of the UN Commission on Human Rights shortly after. War has left the planet in ruins. The Soviet Union and the United States were drawing parallels. Eleanor, however, would not allow ideology to stifle grief. She pushed for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to include economic rights, items including food, housing, and healthcare. Soviet representatives fiercely resisted, accusing her of using the rights debate as a pretext for Western meddling. She didn't make theoretical arguments. She showed them photos. Children suffering from starvation during her journey, bone-thin arms and hollow eyes. There was silence. That quiet became encouragement. She helped them understand the true meaning of policy. Eleanor visited the shattered remnants of Europe in 1946. Children barefoot, buildings bombed out. Up to 10,000 youngsters were reportedly starving to death every week. She carried the figures with her into policy as much as in her memory. She put the most effort into Article 25 of the Declaration. It said more than just that everyone is entitled to dignity. It listed shelter, food, and health care. She penned that line while thinking about the kids she had held at orphanages. Some are too frail to weep. Her revisions transformed abstract rights into demands that may save lives. Noble notions did not satisfy her. She desired a genuine promise from the world. Her efforts made sure that the proclamation covered more ground than just freedom. It was about surviving. She wore the same simple blue serge suit every day when she traveled to Paris in 1947 for the UN conference. She made no effort to impress. She was trying to convey something. She remained silent when Soviet representatives claimed that women's voting rights weren't universal. She described the threats, the hate mail, and the struggle she endured to gain the right to vote in 1920. She then questioned whether they would also silence women in their own nations. No one responded. They were unable to. No podium could match the height of the blue outfit. It was hard to dismiss the question when she persisted calmly. Equal rights for men and women remained steadfast in the final language. That suit evolved into more than just a claw. It turned into a silent banner. After 81 discussions, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was completed on December 10, 1948. A few nations paused. Its scope alarmed Australia and others. There was no talk from Eleanor. She narrated tales. She told her what Holocaust survivors had whispered to her about the family that disappeared, the smoke, and the quiet. One child, she added, didn't know his own name because all the people who had said it had left. There was silence in the hall. After then, the ballots were cast. 8 abstained, and 48 were in favor. Nobody cast a vote against it. The globe came to a consensus on what it meant to be human that night for the first time. Eleanor had also delivered it. She didn't sleep the following year. She traveled across 35 nations in jeeps, trains, and airplanes. She challenged structures that were more ancient than most governments in India by speaking out against caste inequality. The reaction was immediate. Some people threatened to bomb her, and others threatened to kill her. She was told to leave by her team. She remained. She had covert meetings with activists. She protected their name with hers. She was determined, but the risk was real. She knew when silence turns into complicity because she had witnessed enough injustice. Her presence in India affected more than simply the balance of power. Those crushed beneath it were given a voice. She left the UN in 1952 in protest rather than as a retreat. Truman had backed the war in Korea. Eleanor was unable to. However, her decision to leave the UN only led her to enter the domestic civil rights struggle head-on. She became a member of the Andral CP board that same year. She witnessed children using books with missing pages, rusting doors, crumbling buildings, and divided schools. She used her own money to pay for the cases. Brown versus Board of Education was the outcome of one of them. She didn't merely say something. She supported her statements with presence, pressure, and checks. Eleanor appeared in court when segregationists attempted to keep the case quiet. She founded Americans for Democratic Action in 1953 with Hubert Humphrey and other progressives. The enemy wasn't on the other side of the world this time. In her own nation, it was terror. The McCarthy era was well underway. Artists were placed on a blacklist. Writers lost their homes and careers. Eleanor didn't mutter anything. She gave a statement. In her piece, she discussed the 300 authors who were evicted from Hollywood. She recounted their tales. She restored the human element to statistics. She also served as a reminder to the population of what true tyranny looked like when the government attempted to portray them as adversaries. She resisted the fear by standing up, even as it drew nearer. Eleanor was appointed to chair the new Council on Women's Status after John F. Kennedy took office as president in 1961. She was 77. She accepted that her health was declining. She advocated for salary parity. She recalled her travels to factories during the Great Depression, when women were paid half the wage, 59 cents on the dollar, for doing men's labor. She shared those recollections with the committee. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 was influenced by the work she oversaw. Her struggle intensified despite her waning strength. Regardless of the lateness of her life, she was determined to get justice codified into law. She once more supported Adlai Stevenson in 1956, but this time she did it while participating in a march in New York following the bombing of the Montgomery bus. She personally knew a kid activist who had been murdered. Her face, not just her words, conveyed the pain. She grieved for civil rights, not only discussing them. Her demonstrations weren't meant to make news. They were individual acts of disobedience. The loss of that child weighed heavily on every speech she gave after that. She was truly outraged. People were moved by it. Politicians were moved. She continued to speak up to 150 times annually, even following a 1958 trip to South Africa. She experienced the fallout from the Sharpeville tragedy that year. Police shot 69 people. She got to know the survivors. She smuggled money to exiles after that. She made no pretense of it. She simply did it. Additionally, she did not conceal the violence when she addressed before the UN. She went into great depth about it. She made diplomats listen to it. Her remarks paved the way for subsequent international opposition to apartheid. She was aware that civil rights were a global issue. Everywhere, injustice necessitated action. She consented to rejoin the U.S. delegation to the UN for a special trip to Moscow in 1961 when she was 76. It was meant to have symbolic meaning. It changed into something else. In a hospital in Moscow, she passed out. She almost died from anemia, yet she lived long enough to face Khrushchev. She informed him that Soviet gulags were not as bad as American segregation. The room was filled with gasps. Reporters rushed to document it, but Eleanor remained unfazed. She spoke what needed to be said. She had to return home due to her health, but her words remained. They reverberated in areas without electricity. Her doctors diagnosed her with Hodgkin's lymphoma, a type of bone marrow cancer, in 1962. She continued to write. She continued to write her My Day column from her hospital bed. She wrote about Hiroshima in one of her final works. She had witnessed the victims' silhouettes and shadow traces seared into the concrete. It was the worst thing she had ever seen, she remarked. She made the case for nuclear disarmament using that trauma. Even when her body was dying, the world's conscience was still shaken by her pen. On November 7, 1962, she passed away in New York. Her age was 78. Her funeral at the United Nations drew more than 10,000 mourners. She was referred to as the world's first lady by Harry Truman. 80 country constitutions had been influenced by her words by 1965. Khrushchev expressed his sympathies. Leaders in civil rights cried. Ambassadors, janitors, students, parents, and everyone else she had battled for crowded the room. Her impact persisted after her passing. It made it deeper. Her private journals were then made public. 70 years of composition. They recounted another tale. They talked about loneliness, depression, and betrayal. She wrote about how Lewis's behavior devastated her. Flashbacks, she described, were unexpected. She had trouble falling asleep at night and didn't want to wake up in the morning. However, she always did. The journals demonstrated that her struggle went beyond politics. She won it one day at a time, and it was personal. She received recognition on the U.S. Quarter in 2022. The design conveyed her legacy rather than just her face. 250,000 people came together to remember the 1963 March on Washington that same year. Quote, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." Her words were not merely recalled, they were lived. They carried signs with her. She was cited as an inspiration by SNCC leaders. Young ladies saw opportunities when they read about her. Her quarter served as a remembrance rather than a relic. It wasn't just a better world that Eleanor Roosevelt envisioned. Step by step, she paved the way for it. She also continued to walk.